Hello guys, and welcome to another video. Now last night we finally got the full reveal for Path of Exile 3.26 Secrets of the Atlas, and let me just say, they absolutely cooked. They went to town on this one. We're getting the expected Atlas expansion, which is less of an overhaul compared to past expansions, and more so of content being added on top, which I'm a huge fan of because I was a bit concerned for things like the Atlas tree being heavily changed, or replaced, but that's not the case. And the new content that we're getting also includes 3 pinnacle bosses and a boss kill race on top, which is one of those things that I really enjoy spectating at League Star, and to be honest, I've missed it recently because we haven't had one of those for a while, and that's going to be awesome to watch. And we're also getting a League mechanic, which is like companions or mercenaries. You can kit out your own NPC to fight alongside you. That one sounds interesting. Then there's also a large betrayal rework, including new crafting rewards, and the Katarina boss fight has also been improved. And King's March is going core. I didn't expect to see that one in there. But you don't have to build it anymore, the town is already fully completed, so I don't mind that too much. And there's a bunch of other stuff there as well. Honestly, it was a huge reveal, but then we also got the patch notes, and that's what this video is all about. So in this one, I'm going to cover the 3 biggest winners and 3 biggest losers for Path of Exile patch 3.26 Secrets of the Atlas. Let's get into it, beginning with the winners. And winner number 1 is Golems. Would you look at that? Yes, Golems are getting some huge buffs in 3.26. Firstly, the buffs they provide are either changing or being added to in this patch. Flame Golem has had its damage buff increased by about 50% baseline, but it now also provides a good chunk of AoE scaling on top. So 20% increased area effect at all levels, and remember, just like all of these Golem buff changes here, these stats also scale with Golem buff effect. So you can get a lot of generic damage and AoE scaling from Flame Golem now. That's really good. Ice Golem is getting improvements too, higher crit chance from the buff, and it also grants flat accuracy rather than increased accuracy, and that's a lot too, 420 accuracy at level 20, and once again that scales with buff effect as well. Lightning Golem's attack and cast speed buff is now 10% at all levels, so ever so slightly buffed at level 20, but the important thing here is that this one is just really good early on now. As soon as you grab it in the campaign, that buff is going to feel really good. And it now has flat mana regeneration as well, which is very useful. Then there's Chaos Golem, which is likely the biggest change overall here. And this one is the only one with a bit of push and pull, because there's also a bit of a nerf here. Chaos Golem used to grant physical damage reduction, which is a very strong stat, and it no longer provides that. However, it now provides chaos resistance and damage over time multiplier for its buffs, which are very good stats. You're obviously going to want to be playing a dot build to fully utilize that one. And lastly, we have Stone Golem, which has life regen, but it also now has increased defenses as well as part of its buff. Again, super strong no matter if you're pathing to the left side of the tree and investing into a bit of armor, or going to the right for suppression and evasion and energy shield hybrid builds, you can make really good use of that. And that's just the skills themselves, because Elementalist also got some huge changes. And one of those changes was the Golem nodes. So the second Golem node, Elemancer, is gone. However, all but one of the stats from Elemancer was added to Liege of the Primordial. So Liege of the Primordial is now just one of the most stacked Ascendancy nodes in the game. It now grants 100% increased Golem buff effect, +2 to maximum summoned Golems, Golems resummon after 4 seconds, and Golems are immune to elemental damage. That's wild for 2 points spent. Elementalist did lose the 25% increased Golem buff effect per summoned Golem, which means that generally I think you're now less interested in investing massively into maximum summoned Golems now, because you already reached 3 max just from the Ascendancy alone, and then with the 1 Golem wheel on the tree you reach 4 max and get a total of 180% increased buff effect. That is so powerful. And many of those Golem buffs are generic power scaling too, so you can use them on most builds. The loss of PDR on Chaos Golem is certainly significant, but even with that, I expect to see a lot of Golem Elementalists in 3.26. Now, the next biggest winner is the Champion Ascendancy. Yep, the Champions return to form. back to the top he goes. 3.25 was a disaster for Champion, it was in a terrible place, and now in this patch it's getting some huge buffs. So firstly, and most importantly, Fortitude. It now causes you to always have your maximum possible fortification all of the time. If you remember back to the days when Champion was God tier, this node provided the baseline 20 fortify all of the time and you couldn't scale it, and it was great. Well, now it's 20 baseline because that's the default fortify, but now you can scale it with modifiers to maximum fortification. That's insane. You can get 6 maximum fortification straight from the passive skill tree, so you just already have 26% less damage taken from hits all of the time. And you also get regen from Steadfast as well, and 10% reduced dot damage taken all of the time from the Fortification Mastery. But then we just have some crazy uniques in the game for Champion. The Celestial Brace can roll up to 10 maximum fortification, that would be 36 total fortify, and you get 36% attack speed too. But that's not all, there's also the Replica Badge of the Brotherhood, which makes your maximum endurance charges be equal to your maximum frenzy charges, and provides maximum fortification equal to your current endurance charges. So let's say you just path to the right side of the tree and grab the 3 max frenzies along the way. That would be 6 maximum endurance charges, and you can invest into the charge mastery at the bottom of the tree and take the Eldritch Implicit for charge gain, and use Enduring Cry 2 to ensure they're always up. That's another 6 maximum fortification. And the crazy thing about this one is that this amulet is balanced around having a chance to force you to lose an endurance charge whenever you gain fortification. But as a champion, you don't invest into or have any way of gaining fortification. You just always have your maximum, so you fully bypass this downside. This combination of uniques is absolutely insane. Having a huge chunk of less damage taken all the time from any incoming hit is crazy, but that's not all for Champion, because there's also that node behind Fortitude, which now provides massive armor, evasion, and attack speed scaling when heavily investing into maximum fortification. If we take the example we just discussed, that would be 42 total fortification, which would mean that Unstoppable Hero would provide 66% more armor and evasion, and 66% increased attack speed. That is so incredibly strong. That's really good for armor stackers, or you could use it in combination with Perseverance, which is really good. And Champion overall is just looking very strong. It still has the Adrenaline node too, don't forget about that one. And just like Golems on the Elementalist, I expect we'll see a lot of champions in 3.26, especially in Hardcore. Now moving on to the third and final winner in this video, self-cast spells. Spells were a major target of the skill balance changes in this patch, with the large majority of that section of the patch notes full of spell buffs. Now I'm not going to go over any spell in particular in this video, but on average many spells received in the region of 20 to 30% more damage scaling on the skill gem itself, and many of these changes were targeted towards channeling spells and chaos dot spells, but there were a few other adjustments in there too. There's also a new support gem for channeling spells, which can scale up to 60% more damage from a single support. That's very good, but it also increases the cost of the skill up to double, so you need to be able to pay that cost. However, those weren't the only self-casting buffs in this patch, because there was another very significant buff, and that's the transfigured version of Righteous Fire. That's Righteous Fire of Arcane Devotion. Now previously, unlike the normal RF, which provides a more spell damage buff while it's active, this transfigured version didn't provide any kind of comparable buff. However, in 3.26, this version of RF is now going to grant up to 25% more cast speed at gem level 20. That is incredibly good for self-casting, and the crazy thing about this is that Righteous Fire of Arcane Devotion burns you for damage based on your maximum mana, not your maximum life and energy shield. So if you don't scale your maximum mana, you'll be able to run this one with a fairly trivial investment into life regeneration and mitigation. Perhaps more crazy than that though is that you can actually use this skill in combination with blood magic, and you just get to keep it up all of the time for free. You take no damage from it because you burn for a percentage of your maximum mana, and you now have no mana. So that is incredibly strong synergy to utilize right there. Alright, now we're moving on to the 3 biggest losers of patch 3.26, beginning with Frostblaze of Katabasis. Yeah, this skill just got utterly destroyed. To be fair, Katabasis was gaining a bit of traction towards the end of Settlers, but it was nowhere near the popularity of Lightning Strike, which has about 5 times as many characters above level 90, and it also had less than half of the players that were using Molten Strike of the Zenith. So to say that this skill was exceptionally popular and desperately needed a nerf would be a bit of an overstatement, and this change caught me off guard a little bit. I expected maybe a bit of a change to Katabasis, but not this much of a nerf. So I guess they just really want you to play this skill for the damage over time component that it has, because the hit damage portion of the skill has now been completely gutted. Now, speaking of gutted, let's talk about the next biggest loser. Let's talk about Archmage, Hierophant, and specifically Ice Nova of Frostbolts. Easily one of the best builds in 3.25 and head and shoulders above any other caster. Well, this build took a giant hit in 3.26. Firstly, the Archmage support gem itself lost about 15% of its damage scaling at gem level 20, which is actually a pretty tame nerf compared to the other things that got nerfed in this build. So notably, it should be mentioned here that Archmage support itself is still very good. It's just worse on Hierophant specifically, and a lot worse with Ice Nova of Frostbolts. We'll get there in just a moment. First though, the Hierophant change. Hierophant got a nerf to what many consider was the strongest Ascendancy notable in the game, Sanctuary of Thought, which is losing its mana reservation efficiency, but that one didn't matter for Archmage Hyro. What does matter though is that it's losing its less mana cost multiplier, and this is being replaced with a 1% base mana regen modifier. Now, the regen is very good, but it's not going to make up for the 50% less cost multiplier, and what this means is that Hierophant is going to have more scenarios where it is lower on mana than before, because previously you were able to scale mana cost reductions like crazy, to the point where you could spam your spells without spending too much mana, which would mean not that much time spent with mana missing, making you have less windows of time where you are vulnerable. But with the cost reduction gone, you now need to spend a lot more mana per skill usage, and even though you'll have more mana recovery, you will absolutely have more windows of time where you're more vulnerable because you have more mana missing. Now, the other component of this build that was nerfed was Ice Nova of Frostbolts, which now expands from 2 Frostbolts rather than 4. Ouch, that is brutal. However, I would like to point out that the Archmage support gem nerf itself wasn't that big of a nerf, and there are other skills that can still utilise this support gem very well. For example, Ball Lightning. So I do still expect to see some Archmage builds in 3.26. Now lastly, for the losers in patch 3.26, it is of course Lightning Strike, which received less of a nerf than I expected, but similar to the Archmage changes, the nerfs here aren't only specific to the LS gem itself. There are also direct nerfs to specific LS builds, which we'll get onto in just a moment. So, Lightning Strike itself received a 50% less damage multiplier on its projectiles, which is quite a big nerf, but keep in mind that Lightning Strike was so good that it will still be very much usable in the upcoming patch. Now on top of that, the returning projectile support that was being used by half of all of the LS builds in Settlers was also nerfed a little bit, so that's another compounding nerf there. And then we have the specific nerfs to Lightning Strike builds. The 2 main builds were Slayer and Trickster. Now the Slayer version is losing the runesmithing enchantment for 2-handed swords. Even though King's March is back in 3.26, I believe the runesmithing part of it is not returning, so that extremely powerful elemental damage enchantment is no longer accessible. Then for Trickster, the Ascendancy itself took some hits, including weaker scaling for the Evasion and Energy Shield branch, but even though this is a nerf, I think Trickster itself is still very strong. But lastly, Ephemeral Edge did not escape the nerf bat either. It now has a roll range which results in 50% less damage at the lowest roll and 25% less damage at the highest roll. So if you compile all of those nerfs together, LS did actually take quite a big hit, but a deserved hit, I should add. Now there are a few notable mentions here at the end, such as Molten Strike of the Zenith, which did get nerfed, but again, is still very good. And the big honourable mention there that almost made it into my winners section is Volcanic Fissure of Snaking. And you may be thinking, hold on a moment, it wasn't in the patch notes. Well, you're correct. Volcanic Fissure of Snaking wasn't in the patch notes, which means that it wasn't nerfed. Which means that comparatively with most other things, it was actually buffed overall. In fact, I expect Volcanic Fissure of Snaking to be one of the most played, if not the most played skill in 3.26 Secrets of the Atlas. We'll have to wait and see on that one. But that's it. My biggest winners and losers for patch 3.26. What did you guys think of the reveal? Are you hyped to log in next week? I know I am. Let me know by commenting down below. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.